wedding of the decade.
As you walk down the aisle, it'll be just like the Normandy landing.
Dibley style.
First, material for the dress. Now, what do you think of pine?
The Vicar of Dibley. New Year's Day at 9:30 on BBC One.
The news now on BBC One with Louise Minchin.
Saddam Hussein has been executed. He was hanged in Baghdad for crimes against humanity. He was filmed as he went to the gallows. Witnesses said he was defiant to the last and showed no remorse.
A
cleric who was present asked Saddam to recite some spiritual words. Saddam did so, but with sarcasm. These were his last words, and then the cord tightened around his neck and he dropped to his death.
Hopes that Saddam's execution would halt the violence have been shattered by a series of car bombs. Good evening. The former Iraqi President Saddam Hussein has been executed for crimes against humanity. He was hanged at dawn in Baghdad. He was filmed as he went to the gallows with his face uncovered. One eyewitness said he showed no remorse. Our World Affairs editor John Simpson is in Baghdad. John.
The Iraqi government was worried that the Iraqi people might not believe that Saddam Hussein was really dead. So they ordered that the entire execution should be videoed with extraordinary results. Some of the pictures in this report are quite disturbing.
Just as the sun came up and the first words of the call to prayer were sounding, Saddam Hussein's extraordinary life came to an end. And the whole scene was captured on video in some of surely the most compelling pictures ever seen. There's just a glimpse of the scaffold where he's about to die and the hangman's noose. Saddam is well wrapped up. They don't want him shivering with the cold. There's no sound with these pictures, but one of the executioners explains to Saddam they're going to put a cloth round his neck to protect it from the rope. He's scarcely listening. He's already told them he refuses to have his face covered when he dies. As they move him over towards the trapdoor, his legs shackled, he seems remarkably calm. No begging for forgiveness. Then, on the trapdoor, they put the noose around his neck. Seconds from his death, he's repeating verses from the Quran. This is where the video ends. The actual hanging isn't shown. The Prime Minister, Nouri al-Maliki, signed the final order for his death last night. Mr. Maliki told the BBC 2 months ago that Saddam would hang before the year's end, though most people thought the process would take much longer. To demonstrate that Saddam was really dead, the government released pictures of his body a few hours later. I went to see the judge who was present at the execution. Was there any question of him being under sedation of any kind?
Not at all. Saddam was normal and in full control. He was aware of his fate, and he knew he was about to face death. He said, "This is my end. This is the end of my life. But I started my life as a fighter and as a political militant, so death does not frighten me."
What happened when you were actually in the execution chamber?
A cleric who was present asked Saddam to recite some spiritual words. Saddam did so, but with sarcasm. These were his last words, and then the cord tightened around his neck and he dropped to his death.
When Saddam Hussein was first captured 3 years ago, hiding in his hole by the riverside, there was quite a lot of contempt for him here for not putting up any kind of a struggle. But slowly, as he made his spirited performances in court, that started to change. And now his calmness in the face of death will certainly add to the Saddam legend. But not among Iraq's Shia Muslims. The man who ordered the deaths of so many of their number is himself dead. There was plenty of rejoicing about that. It seems, though, as if the revenge of Saddam's supporters has begun. 4 car bombs in Baghdad, as well as another in the Shiite town of Kufa, have taken at least 77 lives today, to add to Saddam's own. It's unclear what's going to happen to the body. Some reports say it'll be buried in Ramadi. Others say it'll be taken to Auja, where he grew up near Tikrit. His 2 sons, Uday and Qusay, and a grandson are already buried there. Saddam hated it. It'd be ironic if this were his final resting place. John Simpson, BBC News, Baghdad.
President Bush has called the execution an important milestone for Iraq, but he warned it wouldn't end the violence there. The Foreign Secretary, Margaret Beckett, said Saddam Hussein had finally been held to account for his crimes. Some in the Middle East have questioned the timing of Saddam's execution. David Loyne reports on the international reaction.
Saddam Hussein's extraordinary life came to its extraordinary end with the first execution of a former head of state for crimes against humanity. But as Iraq remains in chaos, the reaction to his death has been muted abroad. George Bush did not speak in person, but issued a statement saying, bringing him to justice will not end the violence in Iraq, but it is an important milestone. And there was a short statement too from Britain's Foreign Secretary, who opposes the death penalty in principle. She said, I welcome the fact that Saddam Hussein has been tried by an Iraqi court for at least some of the appalling crimes he committed against the Iraqi people. In Iraq's neighbour, Saudi Arabia, state television criticised the timing of the execution coming during the Eid festival, saying, leaders of Islamic countries should show respect for this blessed occasion, not demean it. There's been little triumphalism then as world leaders, particularly those with troops in Iraq, contemplate the future. Saddam's trial has not helped the violence. Look at this chart showing the number of acts of violence. The monthly total when he was captured was still less than 20, but it's risen so that 2006 was the worst year since he fell. The month of his sentencing, November, the worst month, with 65 attacks causing deaths. It does now look as though the violence has a momentum of its own, whether Saddam Hussein is dead or alive.
He was representative of the original insurgency as a Sunni secular Arab, but now we're talking about violence with its own dynamic between Sunni and Shia, between neighbourhoods, and the breakup of Iraq.
Back in 2003, I saw evidence that Saddam Hussein gave the orders that began the destruction of Iraq even before he fell from power. These were the instructions signed by Saddam's intelligence chief for his supporters to loot the country and join with Islamist al-Qaeda fighters. But now it has gone beyond his or anyone's control. More than 200 died in Sadr City in Baghdad in that worst month of November. It's hard to see how the death of Saddam Hussein will make any difference to it. David Loyne, BBC News.
Saddam Hussein ruled Iraq through fear and intimidation for more than 20 years. At first, he was supported by the West, but became an international pariah after invading Kuwait. Saddam was captured 3 years ago and put on trial for crimes against humanity. Bridget Kendall looks back on the dictator's life.
Saddam Hussein came to power in 1979. From the start, his ruthlessness was a weapon to instill fear. All dissent was treated as treason, as he admitted himself in an early interview.
We say he who collaborates with a foreign party is sentenced to death.
Within a year, he started a bitter 8-year war with Iran that killed 1 million people and revealed a new brutality. Nerve and mustard gas were sprayed on Iranian soldiers. He even launched chemical weapons on his own people, the Kurds in northern Iraq. Tactics that made Western powers uneasy, but they still gave him their backing, fearing Iran's Islamic Revolution more. But in 1990, he overreached himself. When he invaded Kuwait, the West and much of the Arab world saw it as naked aggression. They mounted a massive campaign to repel him. But Saddam's threat of a mother of all battles never materialized. His troops fled, leaving abandoned and destroyed tanks in their wake. Cocooned in his bunker, he looked marooned and out of touch, but his instinct for survival never left him. He unleashed his Republican Guard to suppress rebellions by Shias in the south and Kurds in the north, the start of a new wave of repression. Inside Iraq, UN inspectors unearthed hidden stockpiles of weapons. They found huge vats of anthrax at this site. Much was destroyed. Whether any stockpiles remained when inspectors were kicked out in 1998 remains a mystery. None have been found since. But Saddam Hussein had succeeded in turning himself into an international pariah. In 2003, the US and Britain, despite much international opposition, led an assault on Baghdad, this time determined to get rid of him for good. His rule crumbled swiftly, but the violent insurgency that followed soon slipped out of control. Eventually, Saddam Hussein was found cowering in a hole in the ground. A proud leader who craved to be feared and admired, his humiliation now apparently complete. To the end, he remained defiant. Perhaps his only consolation was that today's near anarchy was even harder to bear for some Iraqis than Saddam's regime of fear. And without him, Iraq risks falling apart.
Our correspondent Matt Fry is in Washington and our World Affairs editor John Simpson is in Baghdad tonight. First to you, John, what's the reaction been in Iraq?
It depends, like everything else does now in this utterly divided country, on who you are, what your allegiances are. Sunnis bitterly unhappy, feeling that they've lost their standard bearer. Shiites delighted. A man was saying today how he saved all his bullets, waited up all night, fired them off in the air in absolute delight when he heard the news. It depends who you are. Many people are absolutely elated, some very depressed.
And will his death, do you think, make any difference to the levels of violence in Iraq?
Well, I think in the short run, only to make it worse. But I think that will be the relatively short run. The fact is, it's so high anyway that his death, I don't think, could possibly have affected it or brought it down. It's not going to mean that Sunni leaders of any kind are going to come in soon into a Shiite-dominated government. It's going to make that harder in many, many ways. The future is not an easy one here, and I don't think Saddam Hussein's death has made it at all easier.
Matt Fry in Washington. Americans were triumphant when they captured Saddam. Today's reaction has been quite different, hasn't it?
Indeed, in fact, it was almost one of indifference. Saddam Hussein was executed at 9 o'clock in the evening, Texas time. President Bush was at his ranch, fast asleep at that time, with orders not to be woken even if the execution took place. You could say that the indifference of slumber was the ultimate snub to a man who, after all, Saddam Hussein here, had the mother of all egos. But they're not celebrating for a very simple reason. If you look at the statistics, things are looking very grim indeed. December was the bloodiest month for American soldiers in a very bloody year. We're very fast approaching that grim milestone of 3,000 dead US servicemen and women since the beginning of the war. And also there's an overriding sense that the new policy towards Iraq, which the president is expected to announce any day soon, is trapped in inertia. Ultimately, Louise, American soldiers on the ground in Baghdad are having to deal with the inheritance of Saddam Hussein, and that is a country in meltdown.
Matt Fry in Washington, our World Affairs editor John Simpson in Baghdad. Thank you both. In Iraq, the British soldier who died after his vehicle was hit by a roadside bomb in Basra on Thursday was named today. Sergeant Graham Hesketh, who was 35, was from the 2nd Battalion, the Duke of Lancaster's regiment. Bad weather has been hampering efforts to find survivors from a passenger ferry which sank in a storm off the Indonesian island of Java. There are an estimated 600 passengers on board. So far, only 59 people have been pulled from the water alive. The Spanish government has suspended talks with the Basque separatist group ETA after a bomb exploded at Madrid's international airport. The blast destroyed several floors of a car park, injuring 26 people. The bombing ends a 9-month ceasefire by ETA. Stars from stage, screen and the world of sport have been recognised in the Queen's New Year Honours list. There are CBEs for rock star Rod Stewart and the actress Penelope Keith, and an MBE for the Queen's granddaughter Zara Phillips. Mike Sargent reports.
For Zara Phillips, it's the perfect end to 2006. World Equestrian Champion, Sports Personality of the Year, now an MBE, to be presented by her grandmother, the Queen. Other sports stars being honoured this year include the Liverpool and England midfielder Steven Gerrard, who gets an MBE. There's an OBE for the victorious Ryder Cup captain Ian Woosnam.
Gareth Edwards. Edwards over the Welsh 10-yard line, over halfway.
And Welsh rugby legend Gareth Edwards is the proud recipient of a CBE.
Well get there.
I'm just delighted for all those people who supported me through my career, and I just hope that they get the delight and can share in the delight that I have.
The one note of controversy this year, a knighthood for the head of MI6, John Scarlett. He was closely involved with intelligence reports before the invasion of Iraq. Elsewhere, entertainers feature prominently on the list. Veteran rocker Rod Stewart gets his CBE for a career spanning more than 40 years. Penelope Keith, the upper crust star of The Good Life, has been honoured with a CBE.
I suppose I should have to get myself filthy looking for the silly thing.
And Johnny Briggs, Coronation Street's Mike Baldwin, was given an MBE. He said the award was beyond his wildest dreams. For the first time, recipients will be able to display their honour in a new buttonhole badge, as sported by 98-year-old Constance Brown, who's been serving fish in West Wales since 1928 and was made an MBE back in June. Mike Sargent, BBC News.
The main news tonight, Saddam Hussein, the former president of Iraq, has been executed. He was hanged in Baghdad for crimes against humanity. You can see more on that and all of today's stories on BBC News 24 throughout the night. From all of us, good night.
Good evening. If I tried to make a present at the current weather, you'd probably give it straight back to me, so I'll give it to you straight. The Met Office have issued an early warning for more stormy weather across the British Isles over the next few days. Today's now showing signs of just getting away off into the North Sea, leaving behind quite a number of showers there, particularly across the western side of the British Isles. The northeast of Scotland, another chilly night there. Watch out for some ice and untreated roads. Now, right from the word go tomorrow, the cloud, wind and rain gathering all the while initially across Northern Ireland, then pushing ever further to the north, ever further towards the east. And that's only part of the story, because as you'll see there, as it gets above ground, above 400 or 500 metres or so, it will turn very readily to snow. Some really quite heavy downpours as well as we get into the top end of the M6 there across the Cumbrian Fells. Somewhat drier prospect as we get towards the eastern side, through Lincolnshire, perhaps Yorkshire too, and then coming through the Midlands, East Anglia and the south east. Here essentially a dry picture, not an awful lot in the way of sunshine. Make the most of it, that is sure not to last. And as we tumble our way back towards the southwest, well, here mild enough, yes, but it's wet as you'll see, and eventually the wind will become quite a factor. These numbers gathering all the while. Gales, if not severe gale force wind, and Northern Ireland turning showery for a time after that wet start, until the showers merge as the low pressure begins to dominate and the isobars really pack in. 80 miles an hour or so across Northern Ireland, southern Scotland and the north of England. So wherever you're bringing in the new year, watch out, it could be very stormy indeed.
With all 20 Premiership teams in action, it's a busy match of the day next on BBC One. But first, an update from the National Lottery, starting with the Thunderball numbers 2, 10, 11, 26, 30 and the Thunderball is 5. Early indications show there are no winners of the top prize. Dream number 5, 3, 3, 4, 9, 3 and 5. Early indications show there are over 86,000 winning tickets on the game tonight. And in the main lotto draw, the winning numbers are 1, 2, 7, 11, 37, 45 and the bonus is 14. It looks like there are 3 lucky jackpot winning tickets, each winning just over £2.